Hey guys, tonight you're not stepping into the warm pages of a beloved children's book, where Almanzo Wilder rides heroically through blizzards and builds an honest life on the Dakota Prairie. You're not hearing about the romantic farmer who won Laura Ingalls' heart with his gentle Morgan horses and his steady hands. You are standing in a government land office in Yankton, Dakota Territory, on August 21st, 1879. The air smells like ink and sweat and ambition. The wooden floorboards creak under the weight of men who have travelled hundreds of miles for this moment, and you're watching a 20-year-old man commit a federal crime. His name is Almanzo James Wilder. He's stocky, with light brown hair and hands calloused from years of farm work in New York. He wears clean clothes because this is an important day, the most important day of his life so far. He has ridden here with his older brother Royal, who filed his own claim last year. The Wilders are not poor. They are not desperate. They are farmers from a prosperous family in Malone, New York, and they have come west because land in New York is expensive and sons need opportunity. The land office clerk is a tired man who processes dozens of these applications every week. He does not ask many questions. The Dakota boom has brought thousands of settlers flooding into the territory, and the General Land Office wants claims filed quickly. Speed matters more than verification. The clerk slides a form across the wooden counter. The Homestead Act of 1862 requires specific information: name, place of birth, citizenship, and age. The age requirement is clear: 21 years old, or head of a family, or a military veteran. Almanzo is none of these things. He is 20 years old. His 21st birthday will not arrive until February 13th, 1880. That is 5 months away. 5 months might not seem like a long time, but in the Dakota boom, 5 months is an eternity. Good land disappears in weeks. The best quarter sections near town, near water, near the railroad that is pushing west. Those claims vanish almost as soon as the survey stakes go into the ground. Almanzo knows the law. He knows what the form requires. He knows that lying on a federal document is perjury, a crime that could bring fines and imprisonment. But he also knows something else. He knows that the land office clerk will not travel to New York to check his birth date. He knows that the federal government keeps census records and land office records in completely separate systems, filed in different buildings, managed by different departments. He knows that no one has the time or the resources to cross-reference a homestead application against a census taken in another state years ago. And he knows that if he waits 5 months, someone else will claim the land he wants. So when the clerk asks his age, Almanzo Wilder lies. His hand is steady as he writes the number on the line. 21, not 20. 21. The clerk accepts the form without a second glance. Almanzo pays his filing fee. $18 total. $10 for filing, $2 for the commission, $6 for the final patent when he proves up the claim in 5 years. The clerk stamps the document. The transaction is complete. Almanzo Wilder now has the legal right to 160 acres of Dakota Territory land that belonged to the Lakota Sioux 2 years ago, land that the federal government seized and opened for settlement after the Great Sioux War. The lie is written down. The lie is official. The lie is filed away in a cabinet in Yankton, and no one questions it. Not then. Not for the next 5 years while Almanzo builds his claim shanty and breaks the sod and plants his wheat. Not when he marries Laura Ingalls in 1885 and starts the life that millions of children will one day read about in books. Not when he dies in 1949 and his tombstone is carved with a birth year of 1857, the lie made permanent in granite. The truth sits in government records, waiting. 3 federal census records taken in 1860, 1870 and 1875 all list Almanzo's birth year as 1859. The same government that gave him land also documented his real age. The proof of fraud exists in filing cabinets in different buildings, in different states, separated by bureaucracy and distance, and the simple fact that no one ever thought to compare the documents. You need to understand something before we go further. This story is not about one dishonest man. It is about a system designed to fail. It is about a law that promised free land to honest settlers, but provided no way to verify honesty. It is about a government that encouraged rapid settlement of stolen territory and then looked the other way when settlers broke the rules to claim it faster. And it is about the gap between the stories we tell about American history and what the documents actually say when someone finally bothers to read them. Almanzo Wilder's lie lasted for over a century, and the question you should be asking is not why he lied, but why no one cared enough to catch him. You need to see the evidence, because this is not speculation. This is not a theory whispered by historians who do not like beloved children's books. This is documented fact, sitting in government archives, waiting for anyone who cares to look. February 13th, 1857. That is the date carved into Almanzo Wilder's tombstone in Mansfield, Missouri. The granite stone stands in a quiet cemetery, visited by tourists who grew up reading about Farmer Boy and his beautiful Morgan horses. The inscription is clear. Almanzo James Wilder. February 13th, 1857, October 23rd, 1949. The math is simple. 92 years old when he died. An old man who lived through the entire transformation of America from frontier to superpower. But tombstones lie. Or rather, tombstones say what the family wants them to say, and the Wilder family wanted a specific story told. Now you are looking at a different document. The United States Federal Census for June 30th, 1860. The enumerator walks through Malone, Franklin County, New York, knocking on doors and recording information. He arrives at the farm of Royal Lansford Wilder, a prosperous farmer with 10 children and substantial acreage. The enumerator writes down names and ages. He does not ask for birth certificates because New York does not require them until 1880. He writes down what the family tells him. Almanzo Wilder, age 1 year old. If you were 1 year old in June 1860, you were born in 1859. The math is unavoidable. Not 1857, 1859. One census record could be wrong. Census enumerators make mistakes. Mothers with 10 children sometimes forget exact ages. A 2-year error is possible, but wait. 10 years later, you are looking at another census. June 18th, 70. The same family still in Malone, though they will move to Spring Valley, Minnesota within a year. The enumerator arrives. He asks ages. Almanzo Wilder is listed as 11 years old. 11 years old in June 1870 means born in 1859. Again, not 1857. The same birth year as the previous census. You might think one error is possible. 2 errors are suspicious. But there is more. The New York State Census of 1875 lists Almanzo as 16 years old. 16 in 1875 means born in 1859. 3 census records taken by 3 different enumerators over 15 years all agree on one thing. Almanzo was born in 1859, and then there is Rose Wilder Lane. She is Laura and Almanzo's only surviving child, born in 1886. She becomes a successful writer, a journalist who ghostwrites for major publications and helps her mother transform her memoirs into the Little House books. Rose is obsessive about research. She keeps detailed notes. She writes letters discussing historical accuracy. And in her private papers, which become accessible after her death in 1968, Rose acknowledges the birth year problem. She knows her father was younger than the family officially claimed. She knows the tombstone date is wrong. But she never corrects it publicly, because by the time she could have said something, the lie had become the official story, and Almanzo had been dead for years, and the Little House books were beloved by millions of children, and what good would it do to admit that the heroic farmer boy committed federal fraud to get his land? So the tombstone says 1857, and the census records say 1859, and historians who actually examine the documents know there is a discrepancy, but most Little House biographers do not talk about it because the Wilder family mythology is lucrative and beloved, and questioning it feels like attacking childhood itself. Caroline Fraser, who won a Pulitzer Prize in 2017 for her biography, Prairie Fires, The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder, is the first major historian to state the problem clearly. She looks at the census records. She notes the discrepancy. She points out that if Almanzo was born in 1859, he was only 20 years old when he filed his homestead claim in August 1879, which means he lied on a federal document, which means he committed perjury, which means the beloved farmer boy started his Dakota adventure with a crime. And the remarkable thing is not that Almanzo lied. The remarkable thing is how easy it was, how the system was designed to accept lies, how the General Land Office processed thousands of claims without verification, how settlers understood that bending the rules was not corruption, it was survival, how the gap between the law as written and the law as enforced was so wide that a 20-year-old man could claim he was 21 and no one would ever check. You feel the weight of this, the way a simple 2-year lie ripples through history. If Almanzo was born in 1857, he is a legal homesteader who followed the rules. If he was born in 1859, he is a federal criminal who got away with it because the government could not be bothered to verify the one requirement that mattered. The evidence says 1859. The tombstone says 1857. And the question you should be asking is, why did the lie win? You're standing in the Dakota Territory in 1879, and you need to understand something that no one teaches in school. The Homestead Act of 1862 is celebrated as one of the greatest pieces of legislation in American history. Free land for hard-working settlers, democracy in action, the chance for any citizen to own property and build a future. It sounds beautiful. It sounds fair. It sounds like everything America is supposed to be. It was a lie from the beginning, not because the intention was bad. President Lincoln signed the Homestead Act with genuine hope that it would create a nation of independent farmers, a backbone of yeoman democracy stretching across the continent. The law promised 160 acres to anyone who was 21 years old or older, or a head of household, or a military veteran who had served at least 14 days. You filed your claim, paid $18 in fees, lived on the land for 5 years, made improvements, cultivated crops, and at the end of that time the land was yours. Patent granted, title transferred. The American dream made real, but dreams require enforcement. And the federal government never bothered to enforce anything. The General Land Office, the bureau responsible for distributing public lands, was chronically underfunded from the moment the Homestead Act passed. Congress authorized the law but did not provide enough money to verify claims. One land office inspector might be responsible for hundreds of thousands of acres and thousands of claims. The inspector could not possibly visit every homestead. He could not check whether the claimant actually lived there for 5 years. He could not verify ages or citizenship, or whether the house the settler built was actually a 12 by 14 foot structure, or a 12 by 14 inch model made to satisfy the letter of the law while mocking its spirit. The land office relied on sworn testimony. The claimant stood before a clerk, raised his right hand, and swore that everything he stated was true. 2 witnesses, usually neighbours or friends, did the same. Everyone lied. The claimant lied about his age, his residency, his improvements. The witnesses lied to help their friend. The clerk wrote it all down and filed it away and moved on to the next application, because there were 50 more people waiting outside, and the Dakota boom was not going to slow down for the sake of verification. Historians estimate that between 30 and 50% of all homestead claims filed in Dakota Territory during the 1870s and 80s involved some form of fraud. Not minor errors, fraud, deliberate, calculated, systematic fraud, age falsification like Almanzo's, dummy entrymen who filed claims on behalf of railroads or speculators and then immediately transferred the title, fake residency where a man built a tiny shack, visited it once every few months, and swore he lived there continuously, commutation schemes where settlers paid to convert their claim to a cash purchase after only 6 months, avoiding the 5-year requirement entirely, and then sold the land to corporations for profit. The railroads were the worst. The Northern Pacific, the Great Northern, the Chicago and Northwestern Railway all received massive federal land grants, alternating sections along their routes. They wanted the remaining sections too, the ones set aside for homesteaders, because consolidated ownership meant higher profits. So they hired dummy entrymen by the hundreds. Young men with no intention of farming filed claims, proved up with perjured testimony, and transferred the title to the railroad. The railroad paid them a fee. Everyone profited. The land office looked the other way because stopping it would have required an army of inspectors that Congress refused to fund. Almanzo Wilder's age fraud was not unusual. It was normal. It was expected. It was how the system worked when everyone understood that the law as written bore no resemblance to the law as practiced. You watch Almanzo ride back to De Smet from the land office in Yankton, his claim filed, his lie accepted, his future secured. He feels no guilt. Why would he? His older brother Royal did the same thing. His neighbours are doing the same thing. The family down the road filed a dummy claim for their 14-year-old son because they wanted to consolidate 320 acres. The merchant in town filed 4 separate claims under different names. The township clerk is also a land speculator who files claims and flips them for profit. Fraud is not corruption when everyone participates. It is simply the way things are done. And here is the thing that should disturb you. The federal government knew. Annual reports from the General Land Office, written by commissioners and sent to Congress every year, documented the fraud in detail. They described the dummy entrymen, the perjured testimony, the fake residency. Commissioner William Sparks tried to reform the system in the 1880s. He sent investigators. He rejected fraudulent claims. He made enemies. Western politicians and railroad interests blocked him at every turn. He resigned in frustration. The fraud continued. By the time Almanzo Wilder received his patent in September 1884, 5 years after his fraudulent filing, the lie had become legal reality. The statute of limitations was running. The evidence was buried in separate filing systems, and nobody cared anymore. His crime had expired into legitimacy. That is how the West was actually won. Not through honest labour and virtuous settlement, but through systematic fraud that the government enabled, documented, and ignored. May 20th, 1862. You are in Washington, D.C., and the country is tearing itself apart. The Civil War is in its 2nd year. Men are dying by the thousands in Virginia and Tennessee. The Confederacy has seceded, taking with it the Southern Democrats who blocked homestead legislation for decades. And President Abraham Lincoln, tall and exhausted and carrying the weight of a fracturing nation, signs a piece of paper that is supposed to change everything. The Homestead Act. 160 acres of free land to any adult citizen willing to work it. It sounds revolutionary because it is revolutionary. For the first time in American history, the federal government is giving away land instead of selling it to the highest bidder. No more auctions where speculators with cash buy up entire townships. No more 840-acre minimum purchases that exclude ordinary farmers. Just 160 acres, free for anyone brave enough to settle it. The law is simple. You must be 21 years old, or the head of a family or a military veteran. You must be a citizen, or have declared your intention to become one. You must never have borne arms against the United States government. You file your application, pay your $18 fee, build a house, cultivate the land, and live there for 5 continuous years. At the end of that time, you prove up before a land office clerk, bring 2 witnesses to verify your residency and improvements, and receive your patent. The land is yours, 160 acres of American soil transformed into private property through honest labour. It sounds like a dream. It was a nightmare in practice. The problem is not the law itself. The problem is that Congress wrote a beautiful law and then refused to fund its enforcement. The General Land Office receives thousands of applications every month. Dakota Territory alone processes hundreds of claims every week during the boom years of 1878 through 1886. The Land Office has perhaps 24 clerks total to handle the entire territory. They have no budget for investigators, no staff to visit claims, no system to cross-reference applications against census records or military service records, or anything else that might verify whether the person filing is actually who they claim to be. The Land Office clerks sit in wooden buildings in towns like Yankton and Huron and Watertown, and they process paperwork. That is all they do. Process paperwork. A man walks in, fills out a form, swears an oath, pays his fee, and walks out with a claim receipt. The clerk has no way to know if the man is 21 or 19 or 35. No way to know if he's a genuine settler or a dummy entryman hired by a railroad. No way to know if he'll actually live on the land or just visit it once every few months to maintain the fiction of residency. The verification system relies entirely on honour. You swear you're telling the truth. Your 2 witnesses swear you're telling the truth. The clerk writes it down, and 5 years later you come back with 2 witnesses who swear you lived on the land continuously and made improvements, and the clerk gives you the patent. No one checks, no one visits, no one verifies anything. This is not an accident. This is a choice. Congress wants rapid settlement of the West. Rapid settlement means not asking too many questions. The railroads want settlers because settlers mean customers. The territorial governments want population because population means statehood. The land speculators want claims they can buy and consolidate. Everyone has an incentive to make the process easy, and no one has an incentive to make it honest. So fraud becomes normal. Age falsification becomes routine. A 19-year-old who wants land simply claims he is 21. Who will check? A speculator who wants to consolidate a township hires 20 young men to file claims, pays them $50 each, and receives 20 patents that he can combine into 3,200 acres of a railroad right-of-way. Who will stop him? A settler who wants to avoid the 5-year residency requirement pays $1.25 per acre after 6 months, commutes his claim to a cash purchase, and sells the land for $3 per acre to the next speculator. Who will prosecute him? The answer is no one. Because the system is designed to not prosecute. The system is designed to move land from public to private ownership as quickly as possible, and if that process involves lies and fraud and perjury, well, that is the price of progress. You watch Almanzo Wilder file his claim in August 1879, lying about his age, and you understand that he is not a criminal. He is a participant in a system that requires lying to function. The law says 21. Reality says no one checks. Almanzo chooses reality. And in 1862, when Lincoln signed the Homestead Act with hope in his heart, the infrastructure to make it honest did not exist and would never exist. The beautiful dream was broken before it began. 1877. You're standing on land that does not belong to you. It belongs to the Lakota Sioux, guaranteed by the Treaty of Fort Laramie signed in 1868. This treaty established the Great Sioux Reservation covering the western half of Dakota Territory. The United States government promised this land would belong to the Lakota forever. Forever lasted 9 years. 1874. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer leads an expedition into the Black Hills, sacred land within the reservation, and his geologists discover gold. The news spreads. Prospectors flood into the Black Hills in violation of the treaty. The Lakota resist. The government demands that the Lakota sell the Black Hills. The Lakota refuse. The government declares that any Lakota not on the reservation by January 31st, 1876 will be considered hostile. It is winter. The Lakota cannot move their camps in winter. The government knows this. The deadline is designed to fail, and when the Lakota do not report to the reservation by the impossible deadline, the army attacks. The Great Sioux War lasts from 1876 through 1877. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse resist. Custer dies at the Little Big Horn in June 1876, and the army responds with overwhelming force. By 1877, the Lakota are defeated. The government seizes the Black Hills and millions of acres of hunting grounds east of the reservation. The land is surveyed, divided into townships and sections, and open for homestead claims. This is the land Almanzo Wilder will claim in 1879. Land stolen 2 years earlier. Land where Lakota families lived and hunted for generations. Land that the United States government took through war and then gave away to settlers like Almanzo, free, 160 acres at a time, no questions asked about where it came from, or whose bones might still be scattered in the grass from battles fought just years before. You need to understand this context because the Homestead Act's mythology erases it. The story told in textbooks is about brave settlers taming empty wilderness through hard work and virtue. The reality is about military conquest, followed by rapid distribution of stolen land to white settlers who understood that if they did not claim it fast, someone else would. The Dakota boom begins in 1878. The Chicago and Northwestern Railway pushes west, reaching the De Smet area by 1879. Suddenly the isolated prairie has transportation. Suddenly settlers can ship wheat to eastern markets. Suddenly land that was worthless without rail access becomes valuable. The population of Dakota Territory explodes. 14,000 people in 1870, 135,000 in 1880, 511,000 by 1885. This is not gradual settlement. This is a land rush, a frenzy, a stampede of people, desperate to claim the best quarter sections before someone else does. The land offices cannot process applications fast enough. Men camp outside in Yankton and Huron, waiting for the office to open so they can file before their rivals. Town promoters plat entire cities on empty prairie and sell lots to speculators who bet that the railroad will bring prosperity. Most of these towns fail and disappear within years, leaving nothing but survey markers and broken dreams. But during the boom, hope overrides caution, and everyone believes they will be the lucky ones who succeed. Charles Ingalls, Laura's father, is part of this wave. He arrives in De Smet in 1879, working first as a carpenter for the railroad, then as a storekeeper, then filing his own homestead claim. The Ingalls family has moved repeatedly throughout Laura's childhood, chasing the promise of success that always seems just out of reach. Kansas, Minnesota, Iowa, back to Minnesota, and now Dakota. Charles is 43 years old and still trying to establish the stable farm life he dreams about. He will never fully succeed. The Dakota years will bring crop failures, blizzards, illness, and economic struggle. But in 1879, hope still feels possible. Almanzo arrives the same year. He's younger than Charles, healthier, from a wealthier family. His father and brothers support him. He has good horses, capital for lumber and supplies, skills as a carpenter and farmer. He has advantages that most settlers lack, and still he feels compelled to lie about his age to secure his claim, because waiting 5 months until his actual 21st birthday feels like too much risk. That is what the Dakota boom does to people. It creates urgency that overrides honesty. It makes fraud feel like necessity. Everyone around you is bending rules, and if you do not bend them too, you will lose to someone less scrupulous. The land office clerk does not care. The government does not care. The only thing that matters is filing your claim before someone else does. So Almanzo lies, and Charles Ingalls files his claim with his own irregularities that historians note but do not emphasize because he is Laura's father, and the Little House mythology requires him to be virtuous. And thousands of other settlers do the same, all of them understanding that the Homestead Act is not actually about honesty. It is about speed, and whoever moves fastest wins. You need to see how bad it actually was. Because this is not a story about a few dishonest people gaming the system. This is a story about systematic fraud, so widespread that honest homesteading was the exception, not the rule. The 12-inch house fraud. This one is almost funny until you realize it worked. The Homestead Act requires you to build a house on your claim. 12 by 14 feet is the minimum acceptable size, so speculators and dummy entry men build structures exactly 12 by 14 inches. They construct tiny wooden boxes, barely larger than a birdhouse, and place them on the land. When they prove up before the land office clerk, they swear under oath that they built a house 12 by 14 on the property. They do not specify inches. The clerk writes it down, the claim is approved, the patent is granted, and the 12-inch house is tossed away because it served its purpose. The dummy entryman scheme. Railroads cannot file homestead claims directly. The law reserves public land for actual settlers, so railroads hire young men to file claims on their behalf. These dummy entrymen are usually poor, often immigrants, sometimes desperate for any income. The railroad pays them $50 to $100. The dummy files a claim, builds a minimal shack, visits occasionally to maintain the appearance of residency, and after 5 years proves up the claim with 2 witnesses who are also on the railroad payroll. The dummy receives his patent and immediately sells the land to the railroad for a token amount. The dummy makes his $100. The railroad gets the land. Everyone lies, everyone profits. Historians estimate that railroads acquired millions of acres through dummy entrymen during the 1870s and 80s. The Northern Pacific alone may have used dummy schemes to consolidate entire counties in Montana and Dakota Territory. The government knew. Congressional hearings documented the practice. Investigators testified. Reform-minded commissioners tried to prosecute. And nothing changed because the railroads had political power, and the dummy entrymen were too numerous to prosecute individually, and the system depended on looking the other way. The commutation fraud. The Homestead Act allows you to commute your claim after 6 months. Instead of living on the land for 5 years, you can pay $1.25 per acre and receive your patent immediately. This provision was intended for legitimate settlers who wanted to buy their land outright. In practice, it became a tool for speculators. They filed homestead claims, visited the land once or twice to establish minimal presence, paid the commutation fee after 6 months, and sold the land for profit. Some speculators filed dozens of commuted claims, using relatives and hired men to establish technical residency, and consolidated hundreds of acres for resale. The General Land Office reported in 1884 that nearly 50% of homestead claims were being commuted, far higher than the law's framers intended. The age falsification epidemic. Almanzo Wilder's lie about his age was so common that it barely qualifies as notable. Young men routinely claimed they were 21 when they were 19 or 20 because waiting meant losing land to competitors. The Land Office had no birth certificates to check, no database to cross-reference, no investigation budget to verify. You stated your age. The clerk wrote it down. That was the entire verification process. If you looked old enough to be plausible, you were accepted. Census records reveal the scope. Researchers comparing homestead applications to census data find consistent patterns of age inflation. Men who are 19 or 20 in census records magically become 21 in their homestead applications filed the same year. Sometimes the lie is only 1 year, sometimes 2 or 3. The pattern is so common that historians treat it as background noise, not worth highlighting unless the person becomes famous like Almanzo. The residency fraud. The Homestead Act requires continuous residence for 5 years. In practice, settlers interpreted continuous very loosely. You built a minimal shack. You visited every few months. You planted a token crop. You maintained enough presence to avoid complete abandonment. And after 5 years, you brought 2 neighbours to testify that you lived there continuously, and they lied because you would do the same for them when they proved up their claims. The mutual perjury system worked because everyone participated and no one had incentive to report their neighbours. By 1885, General Land Office Commissioner William Sparks estimates that 1/3 of all homestead claims in Dakota Territory involve fraud. Other historians examining the record suggest the number is closer to 50%. Of the 500 million acres distributed under the Homestead Act between 1862 and 1934, historians estimate that only 80 million acres went to legitimate small farmers who actually lived on and worked the land. The rest went to speculators, railroads, corporations, and fraudsters. Almanzo Wilder's age fraud placed him squarely in the majority. He was not an outlier, he was typical, and the system that allowed his lie rewarded him with 160 acres of former Lakota land that he would attempt to farm, struggle to profit from, and eventually abandon when the Dakota dream failed him, like it failed thousands of other settlers who believed the Homestead Act's promises. The law said free land for honest settlers. The reality was stolen land for whoever lied most effectively. That is the homestead story that no one teaches. August 1879. You are Almanzo Wilder, and you have just committed federal perjury to claim 160 acres of Dakota Prairie. The Land Office. Clerk in Yankton handed you a receipt, and now you ride back to De Smet with your older brother Royal, who did the exact same thing last year. Your claim sits 3 miles southeast of town, a perfect quarter section of grassland that was Lakota hunting ground 24 months ago. You do not think about that. Nobody does. The past is erased the moment the survey stakes go into the ground. Your first task is building a claim shanty. The Homestead Act requires a house, and you intend to build a real one, not the pathetic shacks that some settlers throw together from scrap lumber and tar paper. You have skills. Your father taught you carpentry in New York. You understand how to frame a building, how to select lumber, how to construct something that will survive Dakota winters. You also have money, which most settlers lack. Your family is not wealthy, but they are comfortable, and they sent you west with capital for supplies and livestock. You haul lumber from De Smet. Every board is expensive because trees are scarce on the prairie, and everything must be shipped by rail from Minnesota. A simple claim shanty 12 by 14 feet might cost $80 in materials. You build larger, 14 by 16 feet, 2 rooms, real windows with glass, not oiled paper, a proper door with iron hinges, a wood floor instead of dirt. This is not luxury. This is investment. You plan to live here for 5 years, and a house that keeps out the cold and wind is the difference between survival and misery. The walls go up in late August. You and Royal work together, hammering and sawing in the heat. The prairie sun is brutal. There are no trees for shade. The wind blows constantly, carrying dust that gets into your eyes and mouth and between your teeth. You taste grit with every meal. Your hands blister, then callous, then blister again. This is frontier life without the romantic filter. This is labour that breaks your back and burns your skin and makes you wonder if free land is worth the price you're paying in sweat. But the shanty rises. 4 walls, a peaked roof covered with tar paper and shingles, a stovepipe chimney for the cast-iron stove you brought from town. By September, the structure is complete. You have a house. Not much of a house by New York standards, but sufficient for the Homestead Act's requirements, and far better than the 12-inch boxes some speculators are using to commit fraud. Your fraud is limited to age. At least your house is honest. Next, you need water. There is no creek on your claim, no spring, no natural water source except what falls from the sky. You must dig a well. This is back-breaking work. You dig through topsoil, then clay, then layers of rock that must be broken with a pickaxe. Every shovelful comes up heavy and damp. Your shoulders ache. Your hands bleed through the calluses. You dig 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet down into the earth, and finally you hit water. Cold, clear, slightly alkaline water that tastes like minerals and survival. You line the well with stones to prevent collapse. You build a wooden frame and windlass to raise the bucket. You have water, one problem solved. Then comes the breaking. Prairie sod is thick, held together by centuries of grass roots that interweave like iron cables. The first settlers called it Nebraska marble because it is nearly as hard. You hitch your 2 Morgan horses, Prince and Lady, to a breaking plough with a blade designed to cut through the roots. The plough weighs more than you do. The horses strain against their harnesses. The blade cuts a furrow 18 inches wide, flipping the sod over to expose the dark earth beneath. You walk behind the plough for hours, guiding the horses, adjusting the blade depth, breathing dust and grass pollen that makes your nose run and your eyes water. You break 10 acres in the fall of 1879. 10 acres is not much. A successful farm needs 40 or 50 acres under cultivation, but breaking sod is slow. The horses tire. The plough blade dulls and must be sharpened. You break what you can before the ground freezes, knowing you will break more in the spring. For now, 10 acres is a start. You plant winter wheat in October. The seeds go into the broken ground, and you pray for moisture and mild temperatures and all the things farmers have prayed for since agriculture began. By November, your claim is established. House built, well dug, sod broken, wheat planted. You have met the minimum requirements for a homestead. Whether you can make it profitable is another question entirely. But you are 20 years old, lying about your age, farming stolen land in a territory exploding with settlers who believe the same dream you believe, that hard work will be rewarded, that free land means opportunity, that the West is America's future. The long winter is coming. You do not know it yet, but it will test every one of those beliefs. You're not alone on the prairie. That is one advantage you have over settlers like Charles Ingalls, who arrived in Dakota with nothing but his carpentry skills and his determination. You have family. Royal Wilder, your older brother, filed his claim a year before you. His land sits adjacent to yours. The Wilder family strategy is consolidation. If Royal has 160 acres and you have 160 acres side by side, that is 320 acres the family controls. Add another brother or cousin, and suddenly you have 480 acres. This is how successful farmers build empires while individual settlers struggle. Royal is 32 years old in 1879. He is married to a woman the historical record barely mentions, as it barely mentions most frontier women unless they write books or commit crimes. Royal is more established than you. He has been in Dakota longer. He knows which merchants in De Smet are honest, and which are price gougers. He knows which sections flood in spring and which stay dry. He knows that the railroad will eventually push through, and land near the tracks will be worth more than land further away. He shares this knowledge with you because family success is mutual success. You work together during harvest. One man cannot harvest 40 acres of wheat alone. The grain must be cut with a scythe or a horse-drawn reaper, bundled into shocks, threshed to separate the kernels from the chaff, winnowed to remove debris, and loaded into wagons for transport to town. This requires multiple people working from dawn until dark for weeks. You and Royal form a harvesting partnership. You work his fields, he works yours. When neighbours need help, you trade labour. This is frontier economics. Cash is scarce. Labour is currency. You pay debts in hours worked. Your father, James Wilder, remains in New York, but he sends supplies and money when he can. He believes in his son's success. He raised you on stories of opportunity in the West, and now you are living those stories. The reality is harsher than the stories suggested. The prairie is beautiful and terrible. The sunsets are spectacular. The isolation is crushing. You can see for miles in every direction, and what you see is grass and sky and more grass. The nearest neighbour is Royal. The next nearest is a mile away. De Smet is 3 miles distant, a substantial journey when the roads are mud or snow. You spend the winter of 1879 to 1880 in your claim shanty. The cold is worse than anything you experienced in New York. Dakota cold is different. It is the cold of open plains where wind blows unobstructed from Canada to your door. It is the cold that freezes your water buckets solid overnight. It is the cold that makes you wear every piece of clothing you own just to walk to the barn to feed the horses. Your cast iron stove burns constantly. You feed it twisted hay because coal is expensive and wood is scarce. The hay burns fast. You must twist more hay every day, bundle after bundle, your hands cramping from the repetitive motion. You are lonely. This is something the Homestead Mythology never mentions. The prairie is empty. Days pass when you see no one except Royal, and Royal is busy with his own claim. You talk to your horses because they are the only living things that listen. Prince and lady become companions as much as livestock. You brush them daily, not just for their health, but for the comfort of touching something warm and alive. Isolation does strange things to a man's mind. You understand why some settlers go mad, why some abandon their claims and return east, why some drink themselves into stupidity in De Smet's saloons. But you are young and strong and stubborn. You will not quit. Your pride will not allow it. You lied about your age to get this land, and you will not let that lie be for nothing. So you endure the winter. You read books by lamplight until the kerosene runs low, and you must ration it. You mend your clothes until they are more patches than original fabric. You eat salt pork and cornmeal and whatever vegetables you preserved in the fall. You dream about your mother's cooking in New York, the roasts and pies and fresh bread that you took for granted when you lived there. Spring arrives in April 1880. The snow melts. The prairie turns green almost overnight as grass that lay dormant all winter explodes into growth. You feel hope return with the warmth. You plant more wheat in your newly broken acres. You repair your shanty where winter wind found gaps in the walls. You watch De Smet grow as more settlers arrive on every train. The The town gains a hotel, a newspaper, a church. Infrastructure is appearing. Civilization is catching up to the survey stakes. And in June 1880, the census enumerator arrives at your door to ask questions you would rather not answer. He asks your age. You think about the lie you told in Yankton. You think about consistency. You think about how census records and land office records are filed in different buildings and no one ever compares them. So you lie again. 21 years old, you tell him. Not 21. You have been 21 since February. The enumerator writes it down. He has no reason to doubt you. The evidence of fraud accumulates, one document at a time. December 1880. The long winter has De Smet in its grip. This is the winter that will be remembered for generations. The winter so terrible that Laura Ingalls Wilder will dedicate an entire book to its horrors. You're 21 years old now. Actually 21. Your birthday finally catching up to your lie. And for the first time, you notice a girl in town. Her name is Laura Ingalls. She's 14 years old. You're 7 years older than she is. This age gap is not unusual in 1880. Frontier marriages often pair older men with teenage girls because men need time to establish claims and build houses before they can support a family. But 7 years is significant. She is a child. You are a man. You see her anyway. You see her carrying buckets of twisted hay for fuel. You see her thin frame bundled in worn clothes. You see her helping her family survive the winter that is killing livestock and driving some families to abandon their claims and flee south. The Ingalls family is struggling. Charles Ingalls moved his family to De Smet the same year you filed your fraudulent claim, but his circumstances are different from yours. He has no family network supporting him. He has worked as a railroad labourer, a carpenter, a storekeeper, never quite establishing the financial stability he chases. His homestead claim is less developed than yours. His family is larger. Wife Caroline, daughters Mary, Laura, Carrie and baby Grace. More mouths to feed. Less margin for error. The long winter hits families like the Ingalls hardest. You have advantages they lack. You and Royal have supplies sent from New York. You have wheat stored from your harvest. You have hay for your horses. You're not wealthy, but you're not desperate. And in a winter when desperation is the norm, not being desperate makes you stand out. February 1881. The blizzards continue with almost no break. The train stopped running in December. No supplies have reached De Smet in 2 months. The storekeeper's shelves are empty. Families are grinding wheat in coffee mills to make coarse flour for bread. Fuel is running out. People are burning furniture when the hay is gone. This is when you and a young man named Cap Garland make a decision that will define your reputation for the rest of your life. Rumours circulate that a settler named Anderson, living southeast of town, harvested wheat before the October blizzard started. He might have grain stored. No one knows for certain. Anderson has not been seen since the winter began. He could be dead. His wheat could be already consumed. But the town is starving, and rumours are all anyone has. Someone needs to go find out. You volunteer. Cap Garland volunteers to go with you. Cap is 16 or 17, dark-haired, quick to smile, from a widow's family that needs money. You hitch Prince and Lady to a light sled because wagons cannot move through the snowdrifts. The sky is clear for the first time in days, but everyone knows another blizzard is coming. You have perhaps 12 hours to reach Anderson's claim, find him, negotiate for wheat, load it, and return before the next storm hits. If you are caught in the open during a blizzard, you will die. This is not hyperbole. This is meteorological fact. You ride out into the white prairie. The temperature is 20 below zero. Your breath freezes in the air. The horse's breath steams. You navigate by landmarks that are barely visible through the snow. A rise in the land here. A rock outcropping there. You are guessing direction as much as knowing it. If you guess wrong, you will miss Anderson's claim entirely and die on the prairie while De Smet starves. You find him. Anderson is alive, isolated, surviving on his own wheat. He's suspicious when you arrive because people who show up in the middle of winter want something. You negotiate. You offer money, though money is nearly worthless when no supplies exist to buy. You appeal to community. You explain that De Smet is starving. Anderson is a homesteader, not a speculator. He agrees to sell 60 bushels, not all his wheat. He needs some to survive the rest of the winter and have seed for spring planting. But 60 bushels, roughly 3,000 pounds of wheat loaded onto your sled. The return journey is a race against the storm. You can see it building on the horizon, a wall of grey-white advancing across the prairie. The horses pull hard. The sled runners cut through snow. You and Cap take turns walking to reduce the weight the horses must pull. Your feet go numb. Your face stings from cold. But you reach De Smet an hour before the blizzard hits full force. The town greets you like heroes. Men unload the wheat. Charles Ingalls is among them. His daughter Laura watches from a window. You have just saved her family from starvation. You do not know it yet, but this moment will change both your lives. The lie about your age will never be questioned because heroes are not suspected of fraud. Your crime is forgiven before anyone knows you committed it. February 1881. You are standing in De Smet's makeshift store, watching families line up to buy wheat that you risked your life to bring back from Anderson's claim. The storekeeper weighs out portions carefully. £5 per family, £10 if you have children. The wheat you and Cap Garland hauled through 20 below temperatures is being rationed like gold dust, because it might be all that stands between this town and starvation before spring. Charles Ingalls waits in line with the others. He has cash, barely, enough to buy his family's portion. His daughter Laura stands beside him. She's 14 years old, thin from months of inadequate food, wearing a coat that has been patched and repatched until it is more repair than original fabric. She watches you with something you have never seen directed at you before. Gratitude, admiration. You saved her family's life. She will remember this moment for the rest of her life. You do not tell her that you are a federal criminal. You do not mention that you committed perjury on your homestead application 18 months ago. You do not explain that the heroic farmer she's looking at lied about his age to steal land from the United States government. Why would you? The wheat rescue has transformed you from ordinary settler into town hero. And heroes are not questioned. Heroes are trusted. Heroes receive the benefit of every doubt. This is how fraud becomes invisible. Not because people do not look, but because they look at the wrong thing. They see the wheat. They see the risk you took. They see the horses you drove through a blizzard, while other men stayed warm indoors. They do not see the document filed in Yankton with a false birth year. They do not cross-reference census records with land office applications. They do not care that you were 20 when the law required 21 because you just saved them from starving. The long winter finally ends in May 1881. The blizzards stop. The temperature rises. The snow melts into mud that makes the roads impassable for weeks. And then the trains arrive, the first trains in 5 months, loaded with supplies and food and coal and all the things De Smet has lacked since December. The town celebrates. The worst is over. Settlers who fled south during the winter begin returning. New settlers arrive on every train because the Dakota boom is not over, not even close. The population continues to explode. You return to your claim southeast of town. Your shanty survived the winter better than many. The roof held. The walls stayed straight. The stove kept you alive through temperatures that dropped to 40 below. But the wheat you planted in the fall is damaged. Some fields are completely destroyed by snow mold and frost. Other fields show thin, weak growth that will not produce a profitable harvest. This is the reality of Dakota farming. Even when you do everything right, the weather can destroy you. You break more sod in the spring. Your horses are thin from the hard winter, but they recover on spring grass. You plant wheat in the newly broken acres. You repair your fences. You clean your well. You do all the things homesteaders do. The endless labour that the Homestead Act requires if you want to prove up your claim and receive your patent. You need to survive 5 years. You have completed 2, 3 more to go. But something has changed. The wheat rescue made you visible in a way you were not before. People in De Smet know your name now. When you come to town for supplies, men nod respectfully. Women smile, children point and whisper. That is Almanzo Wilder. He is the one who brought the wheat. He saved the town. You are a hero whether you wanted to be or not. And Laura Ingalls notices you. She's still 14, too young for courtship by any reasonable standard. But frontier standards are not reasonable. Girls marry young because life is short and farms need labour and families need to be established before another brutal winter arrives. You're 22 years old, 7 years older than Laura. In another time, another place, this gap might matter. Here, it is normal. You do not court her yet. Not in 1881. She's too young, and you're still establishing your claim. But you see her in town. You talk to her family. You make yourself visible in a careful way, letting Charles and Caroline Ingalls see that you are responsible, hard-working, successful enough to eventually support a wife. This is frontier courtship. Practical, strategic, based on survival more than romance. Your fraud remains buried in a filing cabinet in Yankton. The land office has moved on to processing new claims. Thousands of applications flood in every month. No one has time to review old files. No one compares your stated age on your homestead application to census records from New York. No one notices the 2-year discrepancy. No one cares. You are a hero. Heroes are not investigated, and that is the genius of your timing. The wheat rescue did not just save De Smet. It saved you from scrutiny. Your heroism became armour against suspicion. The crime you committed in August 1879 is erased by the bravery you showed in February 1881. Not legally erased. The perjury still exists on paper, but socially erased. Morally erased. Erased in the only way that matters on the frontier, where reputation is currency and questions about the past are considered rude. You are safe. Your lie is protected by the gratitude of people who will never think to doubt you. September 1884. You are 25 years old. Actually 25 now. 5 years past the lie you told in the Yankton land office. You stand in the De Smet land office, which has opened locally to handle the flood of homesteaders proving up their claims. The clerk is a different man than the one in Yankton. He has no memory of your original application. He has a form in front of him titled Final Proof, Testimony of Claimant. You will swear under oath that you have met all requirements of the Homestead Act. Have you lived on the land continuously for 5 years? Yes, this is mostly true. You spent winters in your claim shanty through 1881. After that, you spent some winters in town because prairie isolation in winter is brutal and dangerous. But you maintained presence on your claim. You visited regularly. You kept livestock there. Continuous is a flexible word. Everyone interprets it flexibly. The clerk does not ask for specifics. Have you made improvements to the land? Yes. Your shanty is still standing. You broke 40 acres of sod. You dug a well. You built a small barn for your horses. You planted wheat, though the harvests were disappointing more often than profitable. You have invested labour and money into this claim. The improvements are real. Have you cultivated crops? Yes. Wheat primarily, some corn. A kitchen garden near the shanty. The yields were never what you hoped. Dakota weather is unpredictable. Drought years alternate with wet years. Grasshopper plagues devour fields overnight. Hail destroys crops weeks before harvest. But you planted. You tried. That counts as cultivation under the generous interpretation the land office applies. The clerk writes down your testimony. Then he asks you to bring in your witnesses. You have chosen carefully. Royal Wilder, your brother, who will swear that he saw you living on the claim regularly. And Cap Garland, your companion on the wheat rescue mission, who owes you a favour and is happy to repay it with perjured testimony if necessary. Though in Cap's case the testimony is mostly true. He has seen you on your claim multiple times over 5 years. Royal swears that you lived continuously on the land, made improvements, and cultivated crops. He does not mention the winters you spent in town. He does not mention that Continuous had generous gaps. He says what the land office wants to hear. Cap swears the same. He is 19 years old now, working as a labourer, an occasional carpenter in De Smet. He will die in a threshing accident in 1891, 7 years from now, his body mangled by machinery that makes farming possible and occasionally kills the men who operate it. But today he is alive and swearing that Almanzo Wilder met all homestead requirements. The clerk accepts the testimony without question. This is how proving up works. Everyone lies a little, some lie a lot. The land office does not investigate. They have thousands of claims to process. Verification would require field agents visiting every quarter section to measure improvements and interview neighbours. Congress does not fund that level of oversight, so the system relies on sworn testimony, and everyone swears to whatever needs to be sworn. The clerk stamps your final proof. He tells you that your patent will be issued within a few months, sent from the General Land Office in Washington, D.C. The land will legally belong to you. 160 acres transferred from public domain to private ownership. The Homestead Act's promise fulfilled. You pay the final $6 fee. The transaction is complete. You walk out of the land office with relief flooding through you. 5 years. You survived 5 years. The long winter that killed livestock and drove families south. The drought of 1883 that withered crops in the field. The economic depression that made wheat prices collapse. The loneliness and isolation and endless labour. You survived it all. And now the land is yours. Except it is not quite yours yet. The patent has not arrived. And even when it does, you will discover something that thousands of homesteaders discover. Owning land is not the same as profiting from land. Your claim has cost you more than it has earned. The wheat harvest barely covered expenses. Your horses are valuable, but livestock prices are falling. The shanty is worth little because lumber is cheaper now than when you built it. The land itself might sell for $3 or $4 per acre if you can find a buyer, but that's only $640 for 5 years of labour and risk. The Homestead Act promised opportunity. It delivered survival. You're not wealthy. You're not even comfortable. You're a farmer with a legal claim to land that does not produce enough income to support a family, which means you need to make a decision, stay on this claim and struggle, or sell it and try something else. But first, there is Laura. She's 18 years old now, old enough to marry, and you've been circling around courtship for 2 years, making yourself visible, proving your worth. The age gap that seemed significant when she was 14 feels smaller now that she is 18, and you're 25. Frontier marriages have been built on less compatibility than what you share. You have land, you have horses, you have a reputation as the man who saved De Smet. You're a hero who committed fraud, and no one will ever know the difference. August 25th, 1885. You're 26 years old. Laura Ingalls is 18. You stand before Reverend Edward Brown in the Congregational Church in De Smet, and you marry the girl who will make you immortal. Not because of anything you will do, because of what she will write. The ceremony is small. Laura wears a simple dress, black cashmere, because white wedding gowns are expensive and impractical. Her family is there. Charles, and Caroline, her sisters Mary, Carrie and Grace. Your family is mostly absent because New York is too far for a frontier wedding. Royal attends, a few friends from town. The minister speaks the words. You place a ring on her finger. She becomes Mrs. Almanzo Wilder. The marriage certificate is signed. Another legal document with your name, another piece of paper that does not mention the fraud buried in your homestead application. You take her to the claim shanty 3 miles from town. This is her new home, 14 by 16 feet, 2 rooms, a cast iron stove, a table and chairs, a bed. This is what you have built in 6 years of homesteading. It is not much. It is not what either of you dreamed, but it is yours, legally yours now that the patent arrived last month, a formal document from the General Land Office granting you title to 160 acres. Laura is practical. She does not complain about the small house or the isolation. She has lived on the frontier her entire life. She knows what to expect. She cooks on the stove, plants a garden, helps with farm work when you need extra hands. She's 18 years old, and already more competent than many women twice her age. This is what frontier life does. It makes children into adults by necessity. But the claim is failing. You know it, even if you do not admit it aloud. The wheat prices continue to fall. The drought persists. The soil, rich when first broken, is depleting from continuous wheat planting without crop rotation or fertilizer. Your harvest in 1885 barely covers seed costs. The horses are your primary asset, not the farm. Prince and lady and their offspring are worth more than everything else you own combined. Then the disasters begin. Real disasters, not just bad harvests. Laura becomes pregnant in the fall of 1885. Your daughter Rose is born in December 1886, a baby in a claim shanty during a Dakota winter. The isolation that was manageable when you were alone becomes crushing with an infant who cries through the night. Laura is exhausted. You are exhausted. The farm work does not stop because you have a newborn. 1887 brings diphtheria. You contract it first. The fever burns through you. Your throat swells until you can barely breathe. Laura nurses you while caring for Rose. You survive, but the illness leaves you weakened, partially paralysed on one side. Your left hand does not work correctly. Your leg drags. You're 28 years old and crippled. Farming requires physical strength you no longer fully possess. Then your son is born in 1888. A boy. You name him after yourself. Almanzo Jr. He lives less than a month. Infant mortality is common on the frontier. 1 in 4 children die before age 5. But statistics do not make grief easier. Laura buries your son while you watch. Still weak from your own illness, unable to dig the grave yourself. The claim shanty burns in 1889. A fire starts in the stove, spreads to the walls and destroys everything you built. You and Laura and Rose escape with your lives and little else. The house is gone. The furniture is gone. The clothes and tools and everything you accumulated over 10 years is ash. You rebuild a smaller house, but the fire feels like judgment. Everything you tried to build in Dakota is collapsing. By 1890, you know the truth. The homestead dream failed. You did everything the Homestead Act required. You filed your claim, though you lied about your age to do it. You lived on the land for 5 years, though continuous was interpreted generously. You made improvements. You cultivated crops. You proved up and received your patent. You followed the rules mostly, and the reward is poverty, illness, death, and fire. The land office never discovered your fraud. No inspector ever came to verify your age. No one compared your homestead application to census records. The crime you committed in August 1879 remained buried in filing cabinets, irrelevant to everyone except historians who will examine the documents a century later and notice the discrepancy. Your lie succeeded perfectly, and it bought you a decade of struggle that nearly killed you. In 1894, you make the decision you should have made years earlier. You leave Dakota. You sell the claim for whatever price you can get, which is not much. You load your remaining possessions into a wagon. You, Laura, and Rose travel to Mansfield, Missouri, where Laura's parents moved after they also gave up on Dakota. You will buy a rough hill farm called Rocky Ridge and spend the next 50 years trying to make it profitable. The Dakota chapter is over, the fraud is buried, and no one will ever prosecute you because the statute of limitations has expired and you are nobody important. Just another failed homesteader who tried and lost. Until Laura starts writing. 1932. You are Laura Ingalls Wilder, and you are 65 years old. You sit at a desk in a farmhouse in Mansfield, Missouri, writing about events that happened 50 years ago. Your daughter Rose, now a successful magazine writer living in New York, has been pushing you for years to turn your memories into books. You resisted at first. Who wants to read about a poor girl's childhood on the frontier? But Rose insists. She says Americans are hungry for pioneer stories. She says the Great Depression has people nostalgic for simpler times when hard work guaranteed success, even though you know that is not how it actually worked. You have a manuscript. You call it Pioneer Girl. It is your autobiography, raw and honest, written for adults. You describe poverty. You describe the fear of starvation during the long winter. You describe watching your father fail repeatedly at farming, moving from place to place, chasing opportunities that never materialized. You describe Almanzo, 7 years older than you, courting you when you were barely old enough to understand what marriage meant. You describe your baby son dying. You describe the fire that destroyed everything. You describe the years of struggle that no one talks about when they romanticize frontier life. Publishers reject Pioneer Girl. Too depressing, too adult, too honest. But one publisher suggests a compromise. Turn it into children's books. Soften the harsh edges. Focus on the charm of frontier life. Make it nostalgic instead of realistic. Children want adventure, not tragedy. Rose agrees. She will help you rewrite. She's a professional writer. She knows what sells. Little House in the Big Woods is published in 1932. Your Childhood in Wisconsin. Filtered through memory and nostalgia and Rose's editorial hand. The book is a success. Children love it. Teachers assign it in schools. Publishers want more, so you write more. Little House on the Prairie. On the banks of Plum Creek. By the shores of Silver Lake. Each book covers a chapter of your life, each one carefully edited to emphasize virtue and hard work and family love. Then comes The Long Winter, published in 1940. The book about the terrible winter of 1880 to 1881, when De Smet nearly starved and Almanzo saved the town by bringing wheat from Anderson's claim. This is the book that transforms Almanzo from struggling farmer into hero. You describe his bravery. You describe the risk he took. You describe the gratitude everyone felt. What you do not describe is the fraud. You know about the age discrepancy. You must know. You married Almanzo in 1885. You lived with him for 64 years before he died in 1949. You saw documents. You heard him talk about his childhood. You noticed inconsistencies. Rose certainly noticed. Rose researched everything obsessively. She kept detailed notes. She questioned dates and ages and timelines. She knew her father's official birth year did not match what the evidence suggested. But the books need heroes. Children's books need characters who are brave and honest and virtuous. A hero who commits federal fraud to steal land does not fit the narrative. So you adjust. Not by lying directly, but by omission. You simply do not mention the homestead filing. You do not discuss Almanzo's age when he claimed his land. You focus on his heroism during the long winter. You let readers assume he was older than he actually was. In Farmer Boy, published in 1933, you write about Almanzo's childhood in New York. The book is charming. Young Almanzo doing farm chores, training horses, eating enormous meals prepared by his mother. Rose helps you write it because you never lived in New York and only know what Almanzo told you decades earlier. The memories are vague. The details are approximations. The dates are fuzzy. You establish a timeline that suggests Almanzo was born in 1857, matching the tombstone date because that is what the family tradition claims. No one fact-checks children's books. No one compares your narrative to census records. Publishers want engaging stories, not historical accuracy. Teachers want books that teach moral lessons about hard work and family values. Parents want nostalgia for a pioneer past that mostly never existed. Everyone wants the mythology. No one wants the complicated truth about fraud and failure and the gap between homestead promises and homestead reality. By the time These Happy Golden Years is published in 1943, the last book in the series, your story has become canonical. Millions of children have read about Laura and Almanzo, the virtuous pioneers who built an honest life through hard work and determination. The books are assigned in schools. They shape how Americans understand their history. They create a mythology of the frontier that erases indigenous displacement, ignores systematic fraud, and simplifies complex economic struggles into moral fables about virtue. Almanzo dies in 1949. His tombstone is carved with the birth year 1857. The lie is made permanent in granite. Laura dies in 1957, 6 days after her 90th birthday. She lived long enough to see her books become beloved classics, to receive thousands of letters from children who imagined themselves in her stories, to watch her memories transform into mythology. The fraud is buried beneath the mythology. The crime is erased by the narrative, and America learns its frontier history from books that tell beautiful lies about how the West was won. You are Rose Wilder Lane, and you know more than you are telling. You were born in December 1886 on a struggling Dakota claim. You survived the disasters that nearly destroyed your parents. You watched your father's health collapse. You lived through poverty that your mother's books will later soften into charming frontier hardship. And you became a writer specifically to escape that poverty. to build a life where you control your own narrative instead of being controlled by circumstances. By the 1920s, you are successful. You write for major magazines, you ghostwrite celebrity autobiographies, you make more money than your father ever dreamed of earning from wheat farming, and you notice something that your mother does not emphasize. The dates do not match. The stories your father told about his age, the birth year on his tombstone, the ages recorded in various documents, they conflict. You are a researcher. You keep detailed notes. You cannot help but notice the discrepancy. You know your father lied about his age to file his homestead claim, or at least you suspect it strongly enough that the evidence feels obvious. You have access to family records. You probably saw census documents, or heard family discussions that reveal the truth. Your father died in 1949 when you were 63 years old. You had decades to ask him directly about the birth year confusion. Whether you did or not, whether he admitted the fraud or maintained the fiction, the evidence exists in government records accessible to anyone who cares to look. But you say nothing publicly, because by the 1930s you are deeply invested in the Little House mythology. You are not just your mother's editor, you are her co-creator. Literary scholars who examine the manuscripts decades later will debate exactly how much you wrote versus how much Laura wrote. The consensus is that Laura provided the memories and the emotional core, and you provided the structure, the pacing, the professional polish that made the books publishable. You also provided the ideology. You're a libertarian by the 1930s, a fierce believer in individual freedom and minimal government. You hate the New Deal. You hate Franklin Roosevelt. You see the Homestead Act era as a golden age when individuals could claim land and build lives without government interference. The irony is almost funny. The Homestead Act was massive government intervention, free land distributed by federal bureaucracy. Your father obtained his land through a government program, then committed fraud to do it faster. This is not libertarian virtue. This is opportunistic participation in a system you now claim to despise. But mythology does not care about irony. The Little House books become your mother's legacy and your political statement. You shape them to emphasize self-reliance, hard work, family values, and the triumph of individual virtue over hardship. You carefully omit anything that complicates this narrative: the indigenous displacement, the systematic fraud, the government programs that enabled settlement, the reality that most homesteaders failed and returned east or moved on to try again elsewhere, and you certainly omit your father's age fraud. Because Almanzo needs to be a hero. The books require him to be brave, honest, hard-working, virtuous. A man who saves a town from starvation by risking his life in a blizzard. That story works. That story sells. That story teaches children about courage and self-sacrifice. A man who commits perjury on a federal land claimed to get ahead of his competitors. That story is complicated. That story requires explaining that everyone was committing fraud. That story undermines the moral clarity the books depend on, so you protect the mythology. When people ask about dates or ages, you provide answers that match the official family narrative. When researchers decades later discover the census discrepancies, your papers are sealed or vague or silent on the topic. You die in 1968, 20 years after your father, 11 years after your mother. Your papers eventually become accessible to scholars. They reveal your editorial control, your political ideology, your sometimes fraught relationship with your mother, but they do not definitively resolve the birth year question because you were careful not to document the fraud explicitly. This is how lies become truth in American memory, not through dramatic cover-ups or destroyed evidence, but through selective emphasis and careful silence. You do not lie directly. You simply do not correct the lie. You let the tombstone date stand. You let the books imply that Almanzo was older than he was. You let readers assume that the heroic farmer followed all the rules. And because your mother's books are beloved by millions, because they shape how Americans understand their history, because questioning them feels like attacking childhood itself, no one pushes too hard on the discrepancies. The fraud remains buried in census records and land office files that no one compares until historians like Caroline Fraser start asking uncomfortable questions in the 21st century. By then, everyone involved is long dead. The statute of limitations expired more than a century ago. Prosecution is impossible. Justice is meaningless. All that remains is the question of whether we tell the truth about our national heroes or protect the myths we prefer to believe. You chose mythology, and for decades, mythology won. 21st century. You're a scholar studying the Little House books, and you notice something strange. The academic community surrounding Laura Ingalls Wilder's work is intensely protective. Tourists visit De Smet and Mansfield by the thousands every year. Museums display artifacts. Festivals celebrate pioneer heritage. The books are taught in elementary schools across America, and any criticism of the mythology is treated not as historical inquiry, but as personal attack. Caroline Fraser publishes Prairie Fires, The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder, in 2017. The biography wins a Pulitzer Prize. It is meticulously researched, drawing on land office records, census data, family correspondence, and Rose Wilder Lane's papers. Fraser examines the gap between the book's mythology and the documented reality. She discusses the indigenous displacement that the Ingalls family participated in. She analyses the government programs that enabled homesteading. She notes the systematic fraud that undermined the Homestead Act's democratic promise. And she points out, clearly but carefully, that Almanzo Wilder's age does not match across documents. Census records from 1860, 1870 and 1875 consistently suggest a birth year of 1859. His homestead application in 1879 required him to be 21 years old. If he was born in 1859, he was only 20 when he filed, which means he committed perjury on a federal document. The response from some Little House enthusiasts is defensive, bordering on hostile. How dare anyone suggest that Almanzo lied? Census records are often wrong. Family tradition says 1857. The tombstone says 1857. The books never specify, but imply 1857. Who is Caroline Fraser to question the Wilder family's own account of their history? This defensiveness reveals something important about American historical memory. We desperately want our pioneer heroes to be virtuous. We need to believe that the West was won through honest hard work, not through fraud and violence and systematic displacement. The Little House books provide that comforting narrative. They tell us that families like the Ingalls and Wilders succeeded because they were good people who worked hard and helped their neighbours. Questioning that narrative feels like attacking the moral foundation of American identity itself. But history is not mythology. History requires evidence, and the evidence suggests that Almanzo Wilder lied about his age to claim land faster, that this lie was utterly typical of homestead fraud in Dakota Territory, that the General Land Office knew fraud was endemic and lacked the resources to stop it, and that the beautiful promises of the Homestead Act were corrupted by systematic non-enforcement from the beginning. The Little House cottage industry built around the books has a financial incentive to maintain the mythology. Tourism depends on it. The museums in De Smet and Mansfield attract visitors who want to connect with the virtuous pioneers from the books. If you tell those tourists that Almanzo committed federal fraud, that Charles Ingalls participated in indigenous displacement, that Rose Wilder Lane manipulated her mother's manuscripts to push a political agenda, that the books are as much fiction as memoir, well, that complicates the experience. That makes people uncomfortable. That potentially reduces museum attendance and book sales. So the mythology persists. School teachers assign the books without discussing the historical complexity. Museums display artifacts without mentioning fraud. Tour guides tell stories that emphasize virtue and hard work and family values. And when scholars like Caroline Fraser point out discrepancies, they are accused of being revisionist, of hating America, of attacking beloved children's books. But this is not about hating the books. The Little House series is beautifully written. Laura's voice is engaging. The stories are compelling. Children should read them. What children should also learn is that the stories are filtered through memory and nostalgia, and editorial control and political ideology, that the real history is more complicated than the books suggest, that the pioneers we celebrate often succeeded through luck and fraud and government assistance as much as through virtue. that the land they claimed was stolen from indigenous peoples who were displaced through military force. That American history is messy and contradictory and full of people who are neither heroes nor villains, but complicated humans making choices in difficult circumstances. Almanzo Wilder was not a villain for lying about his age. He was a 20-year-old man participating in a system that required lying to function. He did save De Smet during the long winter through genuine courage and risk. He did work hard on his claim. He did struggle through poverty and illness and failure. He was a complex person whose life cannot be reduced to either hero or criminal. He was both. Most people are. The question is whether American culture can accept complexity, whether we can love the Little House books while acknowledging their limitations, whether we can celebrate the courage of homesteaders while recognizing the fraud and violence that accompanied settlement, whether we can tell honest history without feeling like we're destroying our heritage. The Little House industry says no. It says the mythology is too valuable to complicate. It says children need simple moral lessons, not complex historical analysis. It says the books are too beloved to question. Caroline Fraser and historians like her say yes. They say we can handle the truth. They say complexity makes history richer, not poorer. They say Almanzo Wilder's fraud matters because it reveals how the homestead system actually worked versus how we pretend it worked. The debate continues. The mythology persists. And the census records sit in archives, documenting a birth year that does not match the tombstone, waiting for anyone who cares enough to look. You're a General Land Office inspector in 1885, and you have an impossible job. Your territory covers 3 counties in Dakota Territory. That is roughly 4,000 square miles. You're responsible for verifying that homesteaders are actually living on their claims, making improvements, cultivating crops. You're one person. There are approximately 2,000 active homestead claims in your territory. Basic math tells you this job cannot be done. You try anyway. You ride out to inspect claims, and what you find is fraud so systematic that it stops being fraud and becomes simply how the system works. You visit a quarter section where the homesteader supposedly lives. The house is a shack 8 feet by 10 feet with no furniture, no stove, no signs of human habitation. But the claim was proved up 6 months ago with sworn testimony from 2 witnesses who stated the claimant lived there continuously for 5 years. You write a report documenting the fraud. Nothing happens. The patent was already issued. The land already transferred to private ownership. Your report goes into a file cabinet in Washington, D.C., where it joins thousands of other reports documenting fraud that no one has the resources to prosecute. You visit another claim. This one has a real house, a well-broken sod. But the family tells you honestly that they spent 3 of the last 5 winters in town because Prairie isolation was unbearable. They visited the claim every few weeks to maintain presence. Their witnesses lied about continuous residence. Do you report this? If you report every instance of non-continuous residence, you will invalidate half the patents in your territory. The government will face thousands of lawsuits. The entire homestead system will collapse under the weight of its own dishonesty. So you write vague reports that document problems without demanding action. You note irregularities without calling them fraud. You describe questionable practices without recommending prosecution. Because you understand something that Congress refuses to admit, the Homestead Act as written cannot be enforced. The 5-year continuous residence requirement is unrealistic for prairie claims, where winter isolation drives people insane. The cultivation requirements assume soil and weather that do not exist in Dakota. The age verification depends on documents that most settlers do not have. The witness system assumes honesty in a context where lying is mutual and expected. You meet Almanzo Wilder during an inspection in 1886. You do not check his age against census records because you have no access to census records. Those are filed in a different department in a different building. Your job is verifying residency and improvements, not investigating whether claimants lied on their original application 7 years ago. Almanzo's claim has a house, a well, broken sod. He clearly lives there at least part-time. His wheat fields show cultivation. Good enough. You mark his claim as satisfactory and move on to the next inspection. Later, you hear about Almanzo's heroism during the long winter. the wheat rescue that saved De Smet from starvation. You remember inspecting his claim. You remember thinking he seemed more competent than most settlers, more established, better capitalized. You do not think about his age. Why would you? Age fraud is so common that investigating it would consume your entire career without changing anything. The system depends on not asking certain questions. By 1887, you are exhausted. You have documented fraud in hundreds of claims. You have written reports that no one reads. You have recommended prosecutions that never happen. You understand now what Commissioner William Sparks discovered when he tried to reform the General Land Office in the 1880s. The corruption is structural. It is not about individual dishonest settlers. It's about a law designed to fail from the beginning. Congress wanted rapid settlement. Rapid settlement required ignoring fraud. The railroads wanted customers. The territorial governments wanted population for statehood. The settlers wanted land. Everyone's incentives aligned toward making the process easy and the verification non-existent. Your job as inspector is theatre. You provide the appearance of oversight without the substance. You document fraud that will never be prosecuted. You write reports that exist to prove the government tried to enforce the law, even though everyone knows. Enforcement is impossible. You resign in 1888. You cannot do this anymore. The futility is crushing. You return to farming, which is at least honest failure instead of bureaucratic pretense. Your replacement will do the same job with the same lack of resources and the same inability to actually stop fraud. The system will continue exactly as it has. Settlers will lie. Witnesses will perjure themselves. Land office clerks will process paperwork without verification. Patents will be issued. Public land will transfer to private ownership. And the mythology will persist that this process represented democratic land distribution rather than the fraud-enabled land grab it actually was. Almanzo Wilder received his patent in September 1884. You inspected his claim in 1886. The fraud occurred 7 years earlier in Yankton. The statute of limitations was expiring. The witnesses who testified to his continuous residence may have lied, though you could not prove it. The age he stated on his original application may have been false, though you never checked. None of it mattered by the time you arrived. The system had already legitimized his claim. Your inspection was a formality, a check mark in a process designed to look rigorous while being completely porous. That is how the West was actually won. Not through enforcement, but through systematic non-enforcement. Not through honesty, but through fraud, so universal that it became normal. Not through heroic individuals, but through a broken system that everyone exploited. You need to see the numbers because the mythology depends on ignoring them. The Homestead Act is celebrated as the law that created America's middle class, that democratized land ownership, that gave ordinary people the chance to build wealth through hard work. The reality is that most homesteaders failed, not because they were lazy or incompetent, but because the system was designed in Washington by people who had never farmed Dakota Prairie and did not understand what they were requiring. 160 acres. That is the amount the Homestead Act provides. In Ohio or Wisconsin or Iowa, 160 acres might support a family. The soil is rich. The rainfall is adequate. Trees provide lumber and fuel. Water is accessible. But Dakota Territory is not Ohio. Dakota is semi-arid. Rainfall averages 15 inches per year, barely enough for wheat cultivation. Trees are scarce. Lumber must be shipped from Minnesota at enormous cost. Water requires deep wells that homesteaders must dig by hand. Winter temperatures drop to 40 below. Summer droughts kill crops. Grasshopper plagues devour fields. Hail destroys harvests weeks before maturity. In Dakota, you need 320 to 640 acres to make farming viable, but the Homestead Act only provides 160. You can file a tree claim under the Timber Culture Act for another 160 acres if you promise to plant trees. You can buy additional land through preemption at $1.25 per acre, but that requires capital most settlers lack. So families try to survive on 160 acres that cannot support them. The costs are brutal. You need a plough, which costs $25. You need a wagon, which costs $75. You need horses or oxen, which cost $100 per animal. You need seed wheat, which costs $2 per bushel, and you need at least 20 bushels to plant 40 acres. You need lumber for a house, which costs $80 to $120 depending on size. You need a stove, dishes, tools, clothes. Before you plant a single seed, you have invested $300 to $500. Now you wait 5 years for your patent while trying to generate income from land that produces inadequate crops in a market where wheat prices are falling. In 1879, wheat sells for $1.20 per bushel. By 1885, it is down to 60 cents per bushel. Your costs remain the same, but your revenue is cut in half. The math stops working. You cannot make loan payments. You cannot buy supplies. You survive by eating what you grow and hoping next year will be better. Most homesteaders quit. Historians estimate that only 40% of homestead claims are successfully proved up and patented. 60% are abandoned. The families either return east, move to town and find other work, or move further west to try again in Montana or Washington. The Homestead Act processes millions of applications, but the majority end in failure. Even successful homesteaders often struggle. Almanzo Wilder proved up his claim. He received his patent in 1884, but his wheat harvest barely covered expenses. His real assets were his Morgan horses, not his land. When he finally left Dakota in 1894 after a decade of disasters, he sold the claim for a fraction of what he invested. The land did not make him wealthy. It made him poor and sick and desperate to try something else. Charles Ingalls never successfully proved up his Dakota claim. He filed, he built a house, he tried to farm. But the long winter destroyed his capital. Subsequent droughts and crop failures prevented recovery. He worked in town as a carpenter, as a clerk, as whatever paid money. His claim was his backup plan, the land he could farm if town work dried up. But he never successfully transitioned from wage labour to independent farming. When he died in 1902, he owned a house in De Smet but no longer owned his homestead claim. The dream failed. This pattern repeats across Dakota Territory. Thousands of families arrive believing the government's promise that free land equals opportunity. They invest their savings. They work brutally hard. They endure isolation and weather and crop failures. And most of them fail anyway because the land cannot support the number of settlers the government encouraged to claim it. The fraud makes sense in this context. If the system is rigged against you, if the costs are unsustainable, if success requires luck as much as virtue, why follow rules that make things harder? If you're 19 years old and waiting until your 21st birthday means losing good land to someone less scrupulous, why not lie about your age? If continuous residence is impossible during Dakota winters, why not lie about that too? If your witnesses must perjure themselves for you to prove up, and you will do the same for them when they prove up, why not participate in the mutual dishonesty system? Almanzo Wilder lied because the system required lying. He failed despite doing everything correctly because the system was designed to fail most people. And the mythology erases all of this, replacing it with stories about hard work and virtue and success through individual effort. The Little House books tell us that pioneers who worked hard succeeded. The Land Office records tell us that most pioneers who worked hard failed anyway. The numbers do not lie. The mythology does. 2025. You're an elementary school teacher, and you just assigned Little House in the Big Woods to your 4th grade class. The children are reading about Laura and Mary and Pa and Ma, living in the Wisconsin woods, making cheese and maple syrup, surviving winter through hard work and family love. The book is charming. The prose is clear and accessible. The moral lessons about cooperation and resilience are valuable. You love this book. You read it when you were 9 years old and it shaped how you understood American history. But you know things now that you did not know at 9. You know that Laura Ingalls Wilder's books are filtered through memory and nostalgia and editorial control. You know that Rose Wilder Lane heavily edited the manuscripts and pushed political ideology that her mother may or may not have shared. You know that the books largely erase Indigenous peoples except as vague threats or exotic others. You know that the homesteading system the books celebrate was corrupt and fraudulent, and caused most participants to fail. And you know that Almanzo Wilder, the hero of Farmer Boy and the romantic lead of these happy golden years, likely committed federal fraud to obtain his homestead claim by lying about his age on his application. Do you tell your fourth graders this? Do you explain that the beloved Farmer Boy was a federal criminal? Do you discuss systematic fraud in the Homestead Act while teaching 9-year-olds about pioneer life? Or do you let them enjoy the books as written, absorbing the mythology unchallenged, learning American history the way you learned it, simplified, sanitized, morally clear? This is not an easy question. Children need stories. Stories help them understand the world. The Little House books are beautiful stories that teach genuine lessons about family, resilience, and hard work. Complicating those stories with discussions of fraud and indigenous displacement might be developmentally inappropriate for fourth graders. Maybe the truth can wait until high school when students can handle complexity. But here is the problem with waiting. By high school, the mythology is already established. Students already believe they know pioneer history because they read Laura Ingalls Wilder in elementary school. When you try to introduce complexity in 11th grade American history, they resist. They feel like you are attacking their childhood. They feel like you are being revisionist, destroying cherished memories, hating America. The mythology becomes defensive. Questioning it feels personal. So maybe the answer is not waiting, but adding context from the beginning. You teach the Little House books in 4th grade, and you also teach that these are stories based on real events but simplified for children. You explain that the real history was more complicated. You mention, age-appropriately, that not all pioneers succeeded, that the land they settled was taken from indigenous peoples, that the government programs that enabled homesteading did not always work as intended. You do not necessarily tell 9-year-olds that Almanzo committed perjury. That might be too much detail. But you can teach them that real history is messier than stories, that people are complicated, that systems can have good intentions but bad implementations, that loving a book does not mean accepting everything in it as historical fact. The Almanzo Wilder age fraud matters because it reveals how the homestead system actually worked. It shows that fraud was not exceptional, but normal. It demonstrates that the government could not or would not enforce its own laws. It complicates the narrative that pioneers succeeded through virtue. Some pioneers succeeded through fraud. Some succeeded through luck. Some succeeded through violence against indigenous peoples whose land they claimed. And most pioneers failed regardless of their virtue or lack thereof. This does not mean Almanzo Wilder was evil. It means he was human. He made choices in difficult circumstances. He participated in a system that encouraged fraud. He worked hard and struggled and failed and tried again. He was brave during the long winter. He also lied to the government to get land faster. Both things are true. History is full of people who did admirable things and questionable things simultaneously. We can celebrate Almanzo's courage without pretending he never broke rules. We can love the Little House books without treating them as perfect historical documents. We can teach children about pioneer life without sanitizing the fraud and violence that accompanied it. Complexity does not destroy heritage. It enriches understanding. Caroline Fraser's biography, which documented the age discrepancy and other historical complications, won a Pulitzer Prize. It was celebrated by historians and reviewers. It also received angry responses from some Little House enthusiasts who felt she attacked their beloved books. This tension reveals America's struggle with honest history. We want heroes without flaws. We want simple moral lessons. We want to believe that hard work guarantees success, and that our national story is fundamentally virtuous. But history is not simple. The West was not empty wilderness waiting for virtuous settlers. It was contested land seized through military force and distributed through a fraudulent bureaucratic system to settlers who often failed despite working hard. Almanzo Wilder's story is America's story, brave and flawed, determined and dishonest, succeeding and failing simultaneously. The question is whether we can tell that story honestly, whether we owe children complexity or comfort, whether truth matters more than mythology. There is no easy answer, but the census records exist. The land office files exist. The evidence exists, and ignoring evidence because we prefer the mythology is its own form of dishonesty. October 23rd, 1949. You're standing in the Mansfield Cemetery in Missouri, watching a granite tombstone being set into place. The inscription reads, Almanzo James Wilder, February 13th, 1857, October 23rd, 1949. 92 years old, a long life spanning the transformation of America from frontier nation to superpower. Born before the Civil War, died after World War II, a man who saw everything change. Except the birth year is wrong, and now it is carved in stone. Laura Ingalls. Wilder stands nearby. She's 82 years old, frail but still sharp. She has outlived her husband by a few hours. She watched him die this morning in the farmhouse they shared for 55 years. She approved the tombstone inscription. She chose the date, February 13, 1857, even though she must know it conflicts with the evidence, even though census records say 1859, even though her daughter Rose certainly knows about the discrepancy. But what is Laura supposed to do? Tell the stonecutter that her husband lied about his age 70 years ago to commit federal fraud? Admit that the heroic farmer from her book started his Dakota adventure with Perjury? Complicate the narrative that millions of readers love? At 82 years old, after 6 decades of marriage, after writing 8 books that transformed her memories into mythology, after watching those books become beloved by children across America, what good would the truth do now? So the lie becomes permanent. The granite locks in 1857 as official truth. Tourists who visit this cemetery in future decades will photograph the tombstone. Biographers will cite the date in their books. Wikipedia will list February 13, 1857 as established fact with a tombstone as the source. The mythology will cite the physical evidence of carved stone, and stone feels more real than census records filed in dusty archives that most people will never examine. This is how lies become history, not through conspiracy or cover-up, but through the simple passage of time and the human preference for clear narratives over complicated truth. The people who knew Almanzo in his youth, who might have remembered his actual age, are long dead. Royal Wilder died in 1925. The neighbours from De Smet are gone. The land office clerk who processed his fraudulent application in Yankton in 1879 has been dead for decades. Anyone who could directly contradict the tombstone date is buried themselves. Rose Wilder Lane stands beside her mother. She's 63 years old, a successful writer living part-time in Connecticut, part-time travelling. She knows the truth about the birth year discrepancy. Her research was meticulous, her notes documented inconsistencies. But she says nothing at the funeral. She has spent the last 17 years, since her father's stroke and declining health, preparing for this moment. She has known the tombstone inscription was coming. She could have objected. She stayed silent. Because Rose understands something that her mother may not fully grasp. The Little House books are more valuable than historical accuracy. The books have sold millions of copies. They are taught in schools. They shape how Americans understand their pioneer heritage. Almanzo Wilder is a beloved character. The farmer boy who became Laura's husband, the man who saved De Smet during the long winter. His heroism matters more than his fraud. The story matters more than the facts. This is a choice. Rose is choosing mythology over truth. Laura is choosing mythology over truth. The family is collectively deciding that the lie serves a greater purpose than honesty would, and they are probably right in practical terms. If the tombstone said 1859, someone would notice the discrepancy with the book's implied timeline. Questions would be asked. The fraud would become public. The Little House industry would face uncomfortable discussions about whether their hero was actually a criminal. Better to let the lie stand. Better to carve it in granite so it looks permanent and official. Better to let future generations assume the tombstone is accurate and the census records are somehow mistaken. The mythology is too valuable to sacrifice for the sake of truth. The funeral ends. Laura returns to her farmhouse, now empty without Almanzo. She will live another 8 years until 1957. long enough to see her books become canonical American literature. She will receive thousands of letters from children who love her stories. She will be celebrated as a pioneer chronicler, an American treasure. No one will ask her about the birth year discrepancy because the tombstone has settled the question. Rose will inherit her mother's estate and literary legacy. She will guard the mythology carefully, controlling which scholars get access to family papers, managing the narrative even from the grave through careful curation of what evidence remains accessible. She will die in 1968, and only then will researchers begin piecing together the fuller picture of how the books were actually written, how much Rose controlled the narrative, how many complications were deliberately omitted. The tombstone remains February 13th, 1857. Wrong, but permanent. A lie carved in granite, photographed by tourists, cited by biographers, accepted as truth by people who never think to check census records against burial markers. This is Almanzo Wilder's final fraud, not committed by him, he was dead when the stone was carved, but committed on his behalf by a family that valued mythology more than accuracy. And for 75 years, the lie worked. Until historians like Caroline Fraser started asking questions that the granite could not answer. 2017. You are Caroline Fraser, and you have spent years researching Laura Ingalls Wilder's life for a biography that will win the Pulitzer Prize. You have read the books, obviously. Everyone has read the books. But you are not interested in the mythology. You are interested in what actually happened. So you do something that most Little House biographers never bothered to do. You check the primary sources. You request Almanzo Wilder's Homestead file from the Bureau of Land Management. The documents arrive, scanned and digitized, available to any researcher who knows how to ask. His original application from August 1879, his final proof testimony from 1884. The patent granting him title to 160 acres in Kingsbury County, Dakota Territory. And right there on the application, in handwriting from 1879, is the age he stated under oath, 21 years old. Then you pull census records. The 1860 census, taken June 30th, lists Almanzo Wilder, age 1 year old, in the household of Royal Wilder in Malone, New York. If he was 1 year old in June 1860, he was born in 1859, not 1857. The math is simple. You check the 1870 census. Almanzo Wilder, age 11, same family, still in Malone. 11 years old in June 1870 means born in 1859. Again, you check the 1875 New York State Census. Almanzo Wilder, age 16, born in 1859. 3 census records taken by 3 different enumerators across 15 years, all agreeing on one thing. Almanzo was born in 1859, not 1857, which means when he signed his homestead application in August 1879, stating he was 21 years old, he was lying. He was 20, turning 21 in February 1880. He committed perjury on a federal document to get his claim filed before his actual 21st birthday. This is not speculation. This is documented fact. The evidence exists in government archives, accessible to anyone who cares to look. The question is not whether Almanzo lied. The question is why no one noticed for 138 years. The answer is simple, because no one checked. Because the Little House books are beloved, and questioning them feels like attacking childhood. Because the homestead, application and census records are filed in different archives, managed by different agencies, and comparing them requires deliberate effort that most biographers never made. Because the tombstone says 1857, and stone feels authoritative in a way that paper records do not. But you are a historian, not a hagiographer. Your job is not protecting mythology. Your job is documenting reality. So you write it down. In Prairie Fires, The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder, published in 2017, you include a section discussing the birth year discrepancy. You present the evidence. You note that census records consistently show 1859, that the homestead application required age 21, that Almanzo filed in August 1879 when he would have been only 20 if born in 1859. You do not accuse. You present facts and let readers draw conclusions. The response is mixed. Professional historians praise your research. The Pulitzer Committee awards you the prize for biography. Reviews in major publications call your book meticulously researched and necessary. But some Little House enthusiasts are furious. How dare you suggest that Almanzo lied? Census records are often wrong. Family tradition says 1857. The tombstone says 1857. Who are you to question what the family said about themselves? This resistance reveals something important. American culture desperately wants its pioneers to be virtuous. We need to believe the West was won through honest hard work, not through fraud and violence. The Little House books provide that comforting narrative. Challenging it feels like attacking American identity itself. But history does not care about what we want to believe. History cares about what the evidence shows. And the evidence shows that Almanzo Wilder committed a crime that was utterly typical of homestead fraud in Dakota Territory, that the General Land Office could not or would not enforce age requirements, that systematic fraud undermined the Homestead Act's democratic promise from the beginning. You're not the first historian to notice the discrepancy. Scholars who examined census records decades earlier saw the same evidence. But most of them stayed silent, unwilling to challenge the Little House mythology or dismissing the fraud as too minor to matter. You decided it mattered. Not because Almanzo was uniquely corrupt, he was not, but because his fraud reveals how the system actually worked versus how we pretend it worked. The mythology says pioneers succeeded through virtue. The documents say pioneers succeeded through fraud, luck, and government assistance. The mythology says the Homestead Act democratized land ownership. The documents say the Homestead Act was systematically corrupted by fraud that officials documented but could not stop. The mythology says Almanzo Wilder was a hero. The documents say he was a hero who committed perjury, and both things can be true simultaneously. Your book will not destroy the Little House mythology. The books are too beloved, too embedded in American culture. Children will continue reading them. Teachers will continue assigning them. Tourists will continue visiting De Smet and Mansfield. But now, thanks to your research, anyone who wants to know the truth has access to it. The evidence is public. The fraud is documented. The mythology can no longer claim ignorance. Whether American culture chooses truth or mythology remains to be seen. But at least now it is a choice, not an assumption. You are reading this script in 2025, and you need to understand what Almanzo Wilder's fraud actually means. Not just for him, not just for the Little House books, but for how we understand American history and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. The easy interpretation is that Almanzo was a bad person who broke the law. That is not what the evidence shows. Almanzo was a 20-year-old man participating in a system that required breaking rules to function. He lied about his age because waiting 6 months would cost him good land. He made a rational choice in a context where fraud was normal. Condemning him individually misses the point. The system was corrupt. Almanzo was typical, not exceptional. The harder interpretation is that the Homestead Act, one of the most celebrated laws in American history, failed in practice even though it sounded beautiful in theory. Congress wrote a law promising free land to honest settlers, then refused to fund enforcement. The General Land Office could not verify ages or residency or improvements. Fraud became endemic because the system made fraud easy and honesty difficult. The democratic promise of the Homestead Act was corrupted from the beginning, not by a few bad actors, but by structural problems that no one had the political will to fix. This matters because Americans still believe the homestead mythology. We believe that free land created the middle class. We believe that hard work guaranteed success on the frontier. We believe that pioneers succeeded through virtue. These beliefs shape current political debates about government programs, land use, and the role of regulation. When politicians invoke frontier self-reliance as a model, they are invoking a myth, not reality. The frontier was never as self-reliant as we pretend. Homesteaders depended on massive government land distribution, military protection from indigenous resistance, railroad infrastructure, and systematic non-enforcement of fraud laws. Almanzo Wilder's story reveals the gap between myth and reality. The myth says he was a virtuous farmer who succeeded through hard work. The reality is more complicated. He committed fraud to get his claim. He worked hard on the land. He struggled with crop failures and economic depression. He nearly died from diphtheria. He lost a son to infant mortality. He watched his shanty burn. He left Dakota after a decade of failure. He spent the rest of his life in Missouri trying to make a marginal hill farm profitable. His Dakota homestead dream failed despite his fraud, despite his hard work, despite his advantages. This is the story we need to teach, not because it destroys the American dream, but because it complicates it. Success is not just about individual virtue. Success depends on timing, luck, government policy, economic conditions, and systems that enable or prevent opportunity. Almanzo did everything the mythology says you should do. He worked hard, he took risks, he persevered, and he still struggled. That is not a failure of character. That is the reality of a system designed to fail most participants. The Little House books are not lies. They are selective memory filtered through nostalgia and editorial control. They tell emotional truth about family love and resilience, and the experience of childhood on the frontier. What they do not tell is systemic truth about fraud, failure, and the gap between homestead promises and homestead reality. Both types of truth matter. We can love the books while acknowledging their limitations. The question is what we owe students learning American history. Do we teach the mythology because it is inspiring, or do we teach the complexity because it is accurate? The answer is probably both. We teach the Little House books in elementary school because they are beautifully written and emotionally resonant. We teach the fraud and complexity in high school and college when students can handle nuance. We create citizens who understand that American history is messy, contradictory, and full of people who are neither heroes nor villains, but complicated humans making choices in difficult systems. Almanzo Wilder lied to get his homestead claim. He also saved a Smet from starvation during the long winter. He was a criminal and a hero. Both things are true. Most historical figures are like this. Abraham Lincoln, who signed the Homestead Act, also authorized the largest mass execution in American history when he ordered the hanging of 38 Dakota men in 1862. Thomas Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal while owning hundreds of slaves. History is not about perfect heroes. It is about complicated people making choices that had consequences. The tombstone in Mansfield says February 13th, 1857. The census records say 1859. The land office file says 21 years old when he was likely 20. The evidence exists. The fraud is documented. And you now know more about Almanzo Wilder's homestead claim than most people who read his story in the Little House books. The question is what you do with this knowledge. Do you dismiss it as irrelevant because the fraud is old and everyone involved is dead? Or do you recognize that how we tell history matters, that mythology has consequences, that the stories we tell about the past shape what we believe about the present? Almanzo Wilder committed federal fraud in 1879, and America has been lying about it ever since, not through conspiracy, but through selective memory, protective mythology, and the simple human preference for heroes without flaws. The choice is yours. Believe the tombstone or believe the documents. Embrace the mythology or acknowledge the complexity. Both options tell you something about who we are.